Marius van Dijk van Newton was born in the Netherlands in 1930 and grew up in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. His father was an infantry officer with the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army.
When the war started, as a small boy, that was a big thing. That was a big thing. We knew a little bit about the war in Europe, but when it hit home, it was a different story. And I felt proud that my father finally could fight, But he was not fighting anymore. He was working in the Secret Service because they knew that he could speak Japanese and Chinese. So by that time my parents were divorced, and I stayed with my father in Bandung, and I had to every day I had to deliver, because the two of us were living in a Russian pension, and every day I had to bring a rantang with his food to the that's called Department van Oorlog, which is translated into English, Department of War of the Netherlands East Indies. And I had to bring it there. There was a desk, and on that corner was just a desk lamp, and then piles high of letters, lots of letters. And he had to open these letters and read those letters. And sometimes there was seed in it, because he gave me some seed and says, please plant it and find out what it is. In that time, I didn't know what it was all about. In later life, I discovered what I think it is. I think what my father was doing was he loved cross puzzles as well. And what he was doing, he was censoring the letters from Japan to the people in Indonesia. So there was a communication between Indonesia and Japan in a secret way. And what he was doing, he was trying to decode the Japanese code, and it was called the B26N. That was the special code the Japanese used, and he decoded all these. He tried to decode these letters, and there were seeds in these letters, and so my father didn't know what it was, but he give me the seeds, and he says plant one of those, and so he could identify what the plant was, but he didn't tell me why he was doing it. Later, in later life, I put the things together. That was the secret of the secret to the secret, to say, because he mixed them and found out, because of mixing them with other letters, he found out what the real letters were. We were playing soccer when a motorcycle, it's a three-wheel motorcycle. It has a passenger compartment next to the motorcycle. These Japanese people picked me up, and they didn't rough me up there, but they put me in that passenger side, and they covered it up. And my youngest brother was playing soccer with me, and he ran into side to call my mother. And by the time my mother was coming out, we were gone. And they rushed me to this building. It's called the Kampitai building in Kampitai headquarters in Bandung. And they dragged me into this building, and then two henchmen roughed me up and said, you wait here. And there was a Japanese officer. His name is Kobayashi, but that was his name. When I was being roughed up, I was hit in my face with bamboo sticks, in my back and my legs, and I was I was asked, where do you know this woman? Where do you know this woman from? I had the feeling when I was interrogated that Ms. Grace de Gruyter was doing something against the Japanese. What it was, I wasn't too sure, and I assumed that she may be hiding soldiers, because it was many of the military men threw off their uniforms and went into hiding and went into resistance. And I said, I know them only because they're friends, you know. And she was just asking where our house was, and that's us all. I never mentioned my mother's name either. And because as a child, and when you are faced with these things, you right away, you know they're up to no good, and it is amazing at that age how protective you become of your family. So then they brought in, I think there were about 10 women, and they were in terrible shape. They were roughed up, they were bleeding, they had no hair on their head, and they were put in front of me. And the question was asked, do you know these people? And I said, no, I don't know these people. Then they were put in front of me, and the bashing and the bashing and the torturing continued, you know. And they said, do you know this woman? The woman would say, do you know me? And I would say, I don't know you. Okay? And this went through all these women, and the one woman who I had to identify was there. And in the beginning I didn't recognize her because she was bleeding and she was all black and blue and she had no hair. But I recognized her on her voice. Kobayashi said to me, I give you an alternative. You have two alternatives. One is, I will open your mouth and I will spit in your mouth. The other is, I will come to your nose, put my fingers in your nose and break your nose. And I chose my nose to be broken. And the spitting in the mouth is the most lowest thing you can do in the Far East, as far as customs and as comes adat, right? So I chose my nose to be broken. And at that instant, when he was coming towards me and to break my nose, all these women attacked him. And there were two henchmen with him and the interpreter. They were there. But they because of the women, the way they attacked me. And to me, those women were old, but in reality, they were in their 25, 24 years of age. They were young women, actually. But from my point of view, they looked like my mother, you know, so I thought they were old, and the way they looked. And they attacked the things. And I can still remember the way the Japanese officer looked to them. And it was the fear in his eyes. The fear in his eyes for these women. And I have never forgotten that, and I thought how brave these women were, you know. So they stopped. They stopped, and they left me alone. And then the women were taken away, and they tied me up outside. And outside was tied up to a tree in the sun. And there were what you call nyankrangs, big red fire ants. And since I was bleeding, they came all over, they bit me all over in the eyes, in my mouth, in my nose, in the rectum, behind my foreskin. And it was horrible. And I finally was to the point that I would collapse.
Marius was 11 when he was detained by the Japanese secret police. He would spend the next 3 years in 3 internment camps.
When we were transported from one camp to another, the problem was that the Japanese reduced the things we had. In the beginning, we were allowed to take our mattress with us, our books, and other things. But when you go from camp to camp, every time it was reduced to absolutely nothing. Finally, we were allowed only to take one book with us. And food was getting bad too. So I thought by myself, why should I take a Bible with me that everybody else did? I took a cookbook instead. The food was so bad. We had twice a day we had a cup of starch, and if you left the cup there, it returned completely to water. And then in the evening we would get a watery rice with a bit of gut and kangkung or sweet potato leaves in it, you know. And so we had, first of all, we had to stand in long lines, and then when you finally got your food, you went back to your place. And I always made it my business that to eat with a small spoon. And then I opened my cookbook and I took the recipe I liked best, and I was reading the recipe and then eating my food, so I didn't have to think about the bad food. And of course, that's the best way for me to keep sanity together, you know, because we were hungry. We had hunger pain constantly. We had hunger pain, and we were eating anything. We were eating bed bugs. We were eating flying ants, because and the way we caught these flying ants was during the wartime. Of course, everything was dark. With the lights above us, they were shaded with old cans, and then the light would go straight down to the floor. And I thought by myself, assume that I make a bowl of water and put the bowl of water right under the light, then maybe the flying ants will fly in it. And true enough, they flew in the bowl of water, and as soon as they flew in the bowl of water, I pulled off the wings and ate it. For some people who couldn't handle themselves, I would help to feed them. The Japanese was afraid for the old men, because they had TB. When they come in our room, they come in with a cloth in front of the nose, and if they came close to me, I coughed on purpose. In general, they die from TB or from beriberi, and there is two kinds of beriberi. One is the dry beriberi, and the other is called the wet beriberi. When you have dry beriberi, and like myself, I was very skinny, and if I would press on my arm like that, then the dent would stay in there. But the people who had wet beriberi, they were all swollen. It was so bad with these men that their testicles were down to their knees. When these people die, we young boys had to bury these guys, okay? We had to bury them, and it was too heavy for us. So what we did, we put them on a table, or even on the stretchers where they were so heavy we couldn't carry them. We would puncture them with a syringe needle. And the end of the syringe needle, we had a tubing, some tubing, and that tubing would lead to a pail. Lower than themselves, and so that water would drain out of their bodies. And it was the nun always said to us, don't get in touch with that fluid, because that may cause infection with you. So, and the part that I never understood was that fluid was dumped in a drain, and the drain would run completely through the camp. You know, so that I didn't understood. If it is so contagious, why just drop it in the thing, you know? But I guess there was no other place. So that's what we did. Then after that, once they were drained, they were a lot lighter for us to carry, and we set them up on a stretcher or a coffin if a coffin was available. And then before they went into the coffin, my next job was to check their teeth. And if there were golden teeth, I had to chisel it out. I had to chisel out the teeth, and then the nun would take it to the Japanese, and the Japanese said we would buy food for them, but we never, we never got extra food from it. Japanese unconditionally surrendered on August the 15th. In Chiden camp, if you were looking for your parents or your friends, you put your name on the board. And my younger brother found me, okay? And says, "Where are you?" I said, "Well, I live with our doctor next door from us." "Oh," my brother said, "I will tell my mother." And so the doctor came home. He says, "Your mother is still alive, and I saw your younger brother." So he delivered me to the camp. And the first thing my mother said, "You are the lucky guy I had." And my mother's very superstitious. Says, "You are the egg with the two yolks." You know? And so I was the first one to come home. And I had a pajama that was made out of a tablecloth with the initials of my mother and my father in it. And she says, "How did you take care of it?" She was so surprised, you know. I really don't know my brother's stories. A little bit about my younger brother's stories. I don't know my mother's story. For some reason, we never talked about it. Never. We were all silent. You know, you didn't talk about it. It was really strange. We didn't talk about it. It was never talked about. And I didn't talk about it until finally I saw the psychiatrist here. It was even when we came back in Holland, they told us not to talk about what happened to you in the Far East. Because the Dutch people felt that they suffered far more than we did. You know, it was warm, you didn't need any clothing. So, you know, even at the high schools, you couldn't talk about it. We were not even asked to write down your story. You know, that was so bad. For years, I didn't know I had it. You know, I didn't have it. Like, for example, what my problem was at school, that for example, when they were teaching chemistry or they were teaching mathematics, that the teacher was writing on the board all the structure of a formula, and then after he wrote it down, he wiped it out, and I may have had a silent stroke or a silent fit, you know, and I would get lost because there were several passages in the formula, and then I saw the beginning of the formula and the end of the formula, and I had to figure out what was in between. So I knew there was something wrong with me, but I didn't say anything, you know, because I didn't want to disappoint my family at home. The nightmare started when I was on board ships. This was in the 1980s. In the 1980s, when I was getting the flashbacks, and I was also getting the nightmares, and they were getting so severe that I went to see a doctor.
Marius was invited to present his story at the World Congress for Mental Health in Japan in 1993. Since then, he has been sharing his story at various public forums and schools to continue healing himself and to help others.
I left the Netherlands in 1954 and I came to Canada, and the Canadians were completely different. They received me with open arms, and I had a chance to do something with my life. I started as a potato peeler and I ended up as a sea captain, and I'm very grateful.
To honor the veterans of the Second World War in Asia and to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II in Asia, Marius successfully lobbied British Columbia's provincial government to declaring August 15, 2005 as the Day of Peace in the Pacific, and also organized with the Office of the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia a ceremony and reception for the veterans.
If they cannot apologize and ignore or deny that they have ever done it, then you made out like kind of a liar. When we talk about the Japanese people and we talk about the government of Japan, they ought to legislate an apology for all the people who they have harmed during the Second World War.